Hi, welcome back. So this is part 2 of chapter 2. I said we'd get back in by talking about the print function. Now the print function is a piece of pre-written code. So please understand, and when we get further into our development in Python, you're going to start making your own functions. So please understand that this is known as the print function. This piece of code was already written for you and happens to be a part of the Python. We're going to make use of the print function by calling it. The print function will display output to the screen. Some functions require arguments when you call them. And an argument is a data given to a function. So example is data that we want printed to the screen, we're going to pass to the print function. Statements in a program execute in that order in the order that they appear. So let me try that again. Statements in a program execute in the order that they appear, and that's from top to bottom. Now, again, in later chapters, we're going to start writing our own print functions, and then we can call code a little bit out of order. But for now, statements in a program execute in the order that they appear from top to bottom. Strings and string literals. A string is a sequence of characters that is used as data. So anything that is several characters, or actually, to be frank with you, even just a single character, um, in most contexts in Python would be known as a string. But truly, oftentimes we think of a string as a sequence of characters. So if you want to say my name, this is a string. A string literal is a string that appears in actual code of a program. Now, let me take a moment to explain this. When we ask a user for input, we don't know what they're going to input. We don't know what that string is. So that is going to be a string. However, when we're writing code, if we write a string in our code, that's known as a string literal because it's literal. There's no interpretation. It's going to be this string. So in fact, in our example here, we talked about using Michael as a string. And in my code, if I use it and I put these single quotes, we can also use double quotes, but most of the time people using Python like single quotes. So if I put in my code this line, this Michael with my single quotes, this is known as a string literal. So what happens if in our string we need to use a single quote? Well, in that case, we would actually use two single quotes in a row to let it know to use a literal of one single quote. So this right here would translate, and by the way, this is my, let me erase that and try again because that was a little bit, yes, right? So this translates in Python to Michael with a single quote. But we have to do the double quote because we're telling the Python editor, hey, I actually want a literal that has a single quote in it. Because remember, single quotes oftentimes tell our program the start and the stop of the string literal. So this, by putting two single quotes, not a double quote, two single quotes, it's telling it that we want to have a single quote there. Now let's step back a little bit and talk about comments. And I need to take a moment to tell you comments are very important. Not only in this class, but just when you get out into your development world. We We often say in the industry that your code should be able to self-document itself. So it should be like reading a book. As a developer coming behind you all and grading your code, I should be able to read it like a book and understand it. In places that code is going to be maybe a little bit more challenging to read, then we want to add what's known as code comments. Code comments start with this pound character. Some people call it a number character, some people call it a pound character, but it is that character right there. And whatever we put behind it is what's known as a comment, aka code comment. Now, we do have this neat little end line comment. So let's say we're using our print function. So we type out print, and we're going to pass it a string literal to tell it what to print. And then we wanted to tell everyone that's reading our code, maybe we want to just make sure that they understand. So we can add our pound sign and say, all in one line. This code will get ran, but we'll stop here because it says, oh, I hit a code comment because I hit this pound, and we'll ignore this. This is known as an inline comment. End line, not inline, end line. Our code, unless we wanted code that would run and do the same thing over and over and over again every time it ran, with no variance whatsoever, we would need variables to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, variables are our names for data. It represents a value stored in the computer memory. It's how we use, how we access and manipulate data stored in that memory. A variable references the value it represents. So, for example, the general format here is variable equals, which is known as the assignment statement, and whatever we want to assign to this variable. So in this example, our variable name is age, and again, we can make that relatively anything we want it to be. And we're assigning 29 into age. Now I could have said my age equals 29, and now 29 would have been stored in the variable my age. And later, when I want this data, I'm going to use the same variable name, including the upper and lower cases. It is case sensitive. So it says in this that the assignment statement, the variable receiving value must be on the left side. And again, whatever our variable name is going to be on the left. We're going to have the assignment operator, and then we're going to assign something to it. So in this case, I'm assigning Mike, the string literal Mike, to my var. A variable can be passed as an argument to a function. So earlier, I briefly talked about the print function, and I remember saying if I wanted to, actually, I'm sorry, we did hello world, that's right. So here is my string literal, and I'm passing this into the print function. This, remember, is known as a parameter, and it's surrounded with parentheses. And that's what we're passing into the print function, so it knows what to print. Now, with that being said, we can also pass in a variable. So remember this variable up here that I set? I call it my var. Well, again, coming down here, I can use the variable as the parameter that's passed into the print statement. Now, you can only use a variable if a value has been assigned to it. So I had to do this first, somewhere before I use my variable. And then I can use the variable. One of the things is when you're passing in a variable to a function, like I just did, let's put my var back. First off, remember, capitalization is important. So the V in this case is capitalized, where all the other characters, even though I have a capital A there, I really don't mean for capital A, so lowercase a. It's the same case, upper and lowercase. And because we're using a variable, we do not enclose with quote marks. As you can see, there's no quote marks around my variable name. If I were to put quotes around my variable name, it would just output the variable name itself. It would say my var instead of what's in my var. So that's why we don't use the quotes. Now remember I said that you could, for most part, you can name your variables anything you'd like. There are some rules though. In Python, variable names cannot be a Python keyword. So we can't name something int. That's a Python keyword. We can't name it print. That's just a couple, obviously there's a list of Python keywords. It cannot contain spaces. So you'll often see variable names that instead of use spaces, they'll use capitalization instead. So in that case, you can see my hello world. A little bit later, we're going to talk about constants. And oftentimes constants will be in all uppercase, and it will use an underscore in spaces. So we could say that underscore is instead of space. However, you can't make an underscore be the first letter or the first character of your variable. After your first character, you can use letters, digits, or underscores. Variable names are case sensitive, so remember that. And a variable name should reflect its use. This is important. Do not use single letter variables. Only in rare cases, and we'll talk about that down the road, maybe in loops, but for the most part, using X or A or B as your variable name, you're going to get points taken off your homework because it's not descriptive enough, and I don't necessarily know what you're using it for. It doesn't make enough sense. Instead, utilize variable names that tell me something, like the time. Amount due, something like that. All right, we're going to stop the video here. This is going to be the end of part 2. And when we come back, we're going to talk about displaying multiple items with the print function. See you shortly.